Okay, let's try it this time. Okay, good. The problem is the computer. When I set this up, YouTube thinks I have a built-in microphone in the computer. I don't. My microphone is in the webcam, and for some reason it defaults to a non-existent microphone. My apologies. So again, and the preset launch, it didn't launch. Why? I don't know. I sat there and watched it. Anyway, here we are. So let's uh, people, please take a moment and let me write this. Take a moment. Okay. I don't know what it is with. Anyway, okay, here we are. Um, Picking up a little bit late on the Black Dahlia Ask Me Anything. Uh, and let me just pick up from last time. Uh, okay, JCL Crow, thank you. Let me just pick up something from the last one. Um, and that is Steve Hodel people. Hello, Soloflex. Steve Hodel people. Welcome. Am I jealous of Steve Hodel? No, I can't think of anything Steve Hodel has that I could possibly want. That was the same answer for John Gilmore. John Gilmore used to say I was jealous of him. Well, John Gilmore didn't have anything that I could possibly want. Steve Hodel doesn't have anything that I could possibly want. So that's kind of that. Steve Hodel, folks, stick around. You may learn something. Okay. Why am I doing the Ask Me Anythings? I really got tired of the increasingly poor quality of the video productions on the Black Dahlia case. If you watch at home, you may not notice. You can't tell really how much they cut corners and what just fly by night outfits and how flaky they are. But I've been doing them since I think it was about 1997. The first one I did was E Mysteries and Scandals. If anybody remembers that, that was the first one I did. And over the years, the production quality has gotten less and less and less, and I just don't want to be involved with them anymore. Okay. People have emailed me like 15 questions. So I'm going to try to alternate between uh, the live questions and the ones that people have emailed me. And thank you. Okay, JCL Crow. How extensively was Mrs. Bersinger interrogated? Um, Betty Bersinger went down and talked to the police. We know she was because there's pictures of her when she finally um, identified herself. And what happened with Betty Bersinger? Betty Bersinger was a very nice lady. I interviewed her in '96. Um, she's the lady who found the body, and she was heading down Norton Avenue. She had a little girl in a stroller, and it was very important to Betty Bersinger that the daughter never see the stroller. Or, pardon me, it was very important to Betty Bersinger that the daughter not see the body or what turned out to be the body, and so that was that. Um, Betty Bersinger was interviewed by the police. I have no way of knowing how much they interviewed her, but they did interview her. The daughter was little. I doubt that she would have any memory of it. Um, I think probably in family lore, but that kind of thing is so traumatic for the family that I really don't see nothing to be gained by interviewing the daughter. I talked to Betty Bersinger, very nice lady. I talked to her husband, very nice guy. We had a very, very pleasant time. I sat in their kitchen and talked to them, and it was fine. She told me the story, and that was that. So that's kind of that. Okay, let's go to the first email question now. which was from Chris. Chris asks, do I know what happened to Dr. Partica? Okay, who's Dr. Partica? Alexandra, Foxy, Butthurt Hotline. Dr. Partica was the partner of Walter Bailey in his medical practice. And after he died, she left Los Angeles. And I forget now exactly when she left LA. She ended up in sort of the Central Valley and then died in Sacramento. You can see, if you look up, you can get her death certificate and find out. I believe she died in Sacramento in the 1980s. So that's kind of the story with her. Okay. Do I know, D. Kagan, do you know what happened with the money that Fickling gave to Miss Short in December of 46? I imagine she spent it, because she was broke when Red Manley left her at the Biltmore Hotel. Elizabeth Short had like maybe $1, if that. I mean, she was broke. So whatever happened to the money that he gave her, it was gone, and that's kind of that. Okay, so next email question here is Helen. Helen says, I recently just finished P.U. Eatwell's book on the Dahlia. Hear that, Boxy? Is all the information in it correct? Especially all those witnesses that saw Elizabeth at the Astor Motel and surrounding areas claiming that she looked drugged and begging for money. Okay, no. Boxy here, my friend Boxy, is the Los Angeles County District Attorney's files in the Black Dahlia case. And why was the grand jury even looking at the Black Dahlia case? Well, that had to do with the Leslie Dillon fiasco. What happened with the Leslie Dillon fiasco is that, long story short, Leslie Dillon saw an article in a true crime magazine, crime publication. I think it was True Detective. If I remember correctly, it was like October of 48. Anyway, Leslie Dillon wrote to Paul DeRiver, who's mentioned in this article, with some ideas about the case. And Paul DeRiver, who at that time was working as the police psychiatrist, got the idea that Leslie Dillon had a split personality, and under this split personality killed Elizabeth Short. So what Paul DeRiver should have done was to go to the homicide bureau, go to the homicide detectives, either Jack Donahoe, who was head of homicide, or the lead detectives, Harry Hansen and Finus Brown, and said, hey, this is what I know. He didn't do that. He conned the Metro squad, the gangster squad, into doing this separate, surreptitious, rogue investigation of Leslie Dillon, where DeRiver persuaded Leslie Dillon to fly out to be his personal secretary was the cover story. But not to LA. He had Leslie Dillon fly into Las Vegas. And so Paul DeRiver and the gangster squad met Leslie Dillon in Las Vegas and started driving back toward Southern California. And they pulled off, they detoured in Banning and checked into a dude ranch there and started questioning Leslie Dillon. And the thing, it blew up. If you don't know the story, it is an absolute fiasco. Leslie Dillon ended up sailing a postcard out the window, and there's a picture of the postcard online where he says, help, get me a lawyer. And so the whole thing blew up. And Leslie Dillon was thoroughly investigated. Most of Boxy here has to do with the investigation of Leslie Dillon. They interviewed everybody on the gangster squad at length. There's a little bit that's not related to Leslie Dillon, but the bulk of it is Leslie Dillon. Anyway, they did a tremendous amount of investigation to establish that Leslie Dillon was in San Francisco when Elizabeth Short was killed. They did chemical tests at the Astor Motel. You cannot, the average person who doesn't know the story, who hasn't looked at the documents, can't imagine how much time they spent tracing where Leslie Dillon was. And it's all in here. If P.U. Eatwell had called me up or emailed me, I could have told her in 5 minutes, no, that's bogus. And if you look at the P.U. Eatwell book, you'll see it's dedicated to a guy named Donald Freed. Okay, who's Donald Freed? Donald Freed is a very nice guy. I talked to him. I interviewed him in 1997, and he told me the same story that's in P.U. Eatwell's book, all about Mark Hansen and Leslie Dillon and yada, yada, yada. And being a reporter, it's like, okay, I'll make a note of that. And I did. And then I kind of went on my way, and I had that in the back of my head. And so as I was going around investigating, looking into things, I kept that in the back of my head. And it's like, no, this just doesn't add up. Anyway, as I said, you'll see that her book is dedicated to Donald Freed. So he finally found somebody to go on this story. But no, there's nothing to it. It's just absolutely wrong. They did investigate Leslie Dillon exhaustively. They poked around the Astor Motel. They really dug into the Astor Motel. They looked into all the supposed sightings. The LAPD examined lots and lots of sightings, way more than people know about. And it is just ridiculous when Steve Hodel says, oh, I have now, there was no lost week. There was no missing week. I have 15 confirmed sightings. Do you really think that the homicide detectives didn't read the paper? You really think they didn't see that and look into it? I mean, come on. The homicide detectives did an exhaustive amount of investigating, beating the bushes, looking for people who thought they saw Elizabeth Short or whatnot. It's phenomenal. So they really did all of that. Anyway, all of that was checked out. Anyway, so that's kind of the answer to Helen. Let's see here. Let's see. Oh, Andre, do you know anything about Ralph Asdel's suspect? Now, let me weave. I think there's actually two stories about Ralph Asdel, a very nice guy. He was loaned to the case. He was loaned to the investigation. He was the guy that you will see in the lineup of purses with Red Manley. There's a photograph of Red Manley. He's sniffing a purse, and that's Ralph Asdel. He did that, and one thing he did was he looked at it, and this was one of the emailed questions. The night before about the night before Elizabeth Short's body was found, there was a neighbor. Guy lived over on the next block. I think his name was Sullivan, but I'm not sure. There's a lot of names to remember. Anyway, the story was that he was dumping yard clippings on this vacant lot where Elizabeth Short was found. And so he thought this guy, who was sort of a strange looking person, it was like a 4-door car, and the rear passenger door was open. And so this guy, Sullivan, assuming that's his name, went around the block and came back, and the guy was in the car and he peeled out, and that kind of thing. That was that. I'm pretty sure Ralph interviewed that neighbor. And then I think Ralph also told me that there was I'm trying to remember what it was now. It was like a restaurant or something like that. I remember him telling me that he noticed there was a car that had been freshly painted. And I think that's about that. And there were a lot of suspects. There were a lot of reports. And I don't think they looked into the suspect too much. And so Ralph told me, well, I just kind of got disgusted with the whole thing and went back. He was loaned to the investigation, so he went back to his regular assignment then. And so that was kind of the end of that. You have to remember the LAPD was overwhelmed with sightings of people who thought they saw Elizabeth Short or had seen Elizabeth Short. They thought they saw her on like the streetcar or a bus stop or something like that. There was a lot to check out. It was a huge investigation. It involved hundreds of officers who were loaned to the investigation, not just the LAPD, but the sheriff's department and the highway. I think the highway patrol did some of the door knocking as well. So there were a lot of people involved. So Andre, does that kind of answer your question? Let's see, who have I got next here? I'll do okay. Stephen asks, during the first question session, someone brought up the Black Dahlia's perfume. I didn't know what that was supposed to relate to, but then I thought about the Hollywood movie extra John J. Darby case of December 13th, 1946. Darby was murdered in his apartment. He was trussed up in a way that the police thought it was done by a professional, a doctor or nurse. They later caught a guy named Leon Douglas who worked in a psych ward. At the crime scene, there was an open bottle of taboo perfume. Is that what the person who asked a question about perfume was referring to? Another attempt, perhaps, to tie Dr. Hodel to a crime, or was that question related to Elizabeth's belongings? Okay. My mom used to wear Taboo. Taboo used to be a very upscale ladies' fragrance. It used to advertise in slick magazines like the New Yorker. The last time I tried to buy it for my mom, the lady at the perfume counter went like, go to Walgreens. It was no longer. It was a very popular scent in the 1940s. Anyway, Stephen, I'm more of a specialist than a generalist. I've never heard of the John J. Darby case. I've never looked into it. What people were referring to, and again, this goes back to Red Manley and Elizabeth Short's purse. He felt that he could identify her purse because he recognized her perfume, and that was the question. And so that's what that is all about. They remember the story about the purse and the shoes. There was like a coffee shop on Crenshaw Boulevard, and the manager of this coffee shop saw on top of a trash can there was a purse with a pair of shoes stuck in it, and so he called the cops to report it, and the trash guy showed up. And so he said, no, this could be evidence. This could be the Black Dahlia shoes and purse. So you need to wait for the cops. And the trash guy says, oh, we get this stuff all the time. And they just dumped it in the trash truck and took it off to the dump. So what happened was they went out to the dump and they went through all the trash for that day. And they got all the pairs of ladies' shoes and all the purses that had been thrown out, and they did a lineup of shoes and purses. And that is why you have the picture of Ralph Asdell holding these purses, and Red Manley is sniffing the purse. He is thinking that he recognized her perfume. So that's what that's all about. Okay, next question. Why is it that most interviewers, shows, articles, podcasts seem to perpetuate the Steve Hodel misinformation and continue to give him a platform despite factual corrections, contradictions, and facts? Boy, I don't know. I mean, there's something appealing about that. Retired homicide detective discovers dead dad is serial killer. I think that's just sort of, that appeals to people. And Steve Hodel has been working 24/7 for the last 20 years, trying to cash in on his LAPD career with these increasingly bizarre claims about his dad being a serial killer who committed every unsolved crime on the planet. I don't know. I mean, and that's one reason I stopped doing the video productions, because what would happen more often than not is they would bring me in to say, okay, what was Elizabeth Short like? Because Steve Hodel can't. His descriptions of Elizabeth Short are very minimal. Um, and historically, what was LA like in the 40s? Because Steve doesn't care about any of that. All he wants to do is talk about his father killing people in homage to Man Ray. It just makes your head explode. And then, so what happens is they interview me, and then they go whole hog on Steve Hodel. So I stopped doing I just stopped doing the interviews. So that's kind of that. Um, let's see. Next email question is okay. This one is, I think, from Malcolm. Was Elizabeth Short ever officially engaged to Matt Gordon? I recall reading somewhere that while Miss Short was staying with the French family in San Diego, she showed them a newspaper clipping announcing the engagement of Matt Gordon to a woman whose name Miss Short had crossed out because the newspaper made a mistake. It must have been another name entirely, because if the newspaper had simply misspelled her name, uh, I doubt Miss Short would have crossed it out. According to Dr. Google, engagement announcements were typically made by the fiance's parents or whoever will be hosting the wedding 2 to 3 months before the wedding date, though I don't know if this was the rule in the 1940s. The announcement must have been placed in the hometown paper of Matt Gordon and or the fiance. Has it ever been located? Do you know if the clipping was found in Miss Short's belongings or included in the envelope the killer mailed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other newspapers? Yes, Malcolm, I can tell you all about that. The newspaper clipping in question is from the Pueblo Chieftain, and it was the announcement that Matt Gordon had been killed. In that article, there is a typographical error. It is not at all what people think. The article misspells the name of her hometown. Um, she was from Medford with an M, Massachusetts, and the newspaper article said B as in Bedford, Massachusetts. And so there was a mistake. And it's in the same sentence as where she was, describing where she was from, but it misspelled the name of her hometown, and that's really it. It has been turned into this completely other thing. Were they officially engaged? I mean, the kind of the engagement announcements were were popular at the time. Um, newspapers used to run a lot of that stuff when newspapers had lots of space. Now they don't do that anymore, but they would run engagement announcements and wedding announcements. Were they engaged? Yes, they were. There's no question about it. His friends have told me, yeah, he was very much in love with her. They were engaged. When he was over in India, he got her a star sapphire engagement ring, as a matter of fact, or a star sapphire for an engagement ring. And there's a letter where she says, now that you've asked me to be your wife, I don't date, and I remember that you're private property and all that kind of thing. So yeah, they definitely were. What happened was, after he was killed, um, she started asking Matt Gordon's family for money, and they kind of distanced themselves from her at that point. And then once she was killed, they didn't want anything to do with her. They just squelched anything that there was any connection between the Gordon family and Elizabeth Short, which is understandable, kind of. So they just minimized it entirely. So that's kind of the deal with that. Okay, so let's go back to the live question here. Amused child. Is the report of an older Ford parked at the dump site accurate, and what did George Bailey drive? I'm not sure who Amused child, I don't know. I'm not sure who George Bailey is. Do you mean George Hodel or Walter Bailey? I'm not sure. I haven't read that newspaper article in a while. Again, we're talking about the one that, again, it's the neighbor who was dumping clippings. It was the neighbor who was dumping clippings on the that vacant lot at the crime scene. And let me explain, that was not unusual. Let me just back up and get a running start at that. Okay. The city of Los Angeles was concerned about material that was going into the landfill. They didn't want stuff going in the landfill. Okay, that makes sense. What'll we do with it? Well, let's burn it. Okay, no, let's not. That turned out to be a very bad solution to a real problem, and that's why you had all the backyard incinerators and the and one reason LA had such bad smog. Okay, along with that, it was sort of accepted that people, instead of putting yard clippings in the trash or burning them, you would go dump them on a vacant lot. That was typical. There was nothing unusual about that at all. Everybody did it. And so what happened is this neighbor, and I'm relying on my memory here that his name was Walter Sullivan. I'm not positive of that, but I think that was his name. Was going over to take yard clippings to put them on this over on Norton Avenue, which was vacant. And he saw a car, and he saw, to repeat, he saw a man. I think it was a figure of a man, and it was the rear passenger door was open, and he thought it looked kind of suspicious, and so he circled the block and came back. And I think there's a little bit more. Either one person tried to look into the car, something like that. Anyway, the guy Sullivan, we'll call him Sullivan, circled the block and came back, and then the guy was in the car, door was closed, and he peeled out of there. Beyond that, the exact make of the car, I don't know. And in terms of finding out what kind of car Walter Bailey drove in 1947, there's just no way to find that out. I mean, there are limits as to what we can locate. I mean, that kind of something that granular is like, it's really hard to find out something that detailed. Is the answer to that question? Okay. Let's see. Okay. Now back to the email questions here. Okay. Let's see. Oh, this is another question from Chris. Okay. Chris asks, was Virginia Short ever actually inside the Bailey home on Norton, or was that just the address on the marriage license? Okay. The relationship of Virginia Short and the Bailey family we know there was a connection between them. It's a little unclear how much. The long answer to that is that Virginia Short was married to a guy named Adrian West, who was a very devout Presbyterian, and he was stationed very briefly at USC when he was going through training for World War II. And being a good Presbyterian, he started going to the closest Presbyterian church, which was just down the street on Vermont Avenue. Okay. The Bailey family also went to that church. And so that was the connection between Adrian West and the Bailey family. When he got married here in Los Angeles, he was married by the minister from that Presbyterian church. And of course, Virginia was the bride, and Barbara Bailey, was the matron of honor because she was married. And so that was the connection between the two families. They were married here in Los Angeles. What Virginia Short said was she gave her address as Massachusetts, as living in Medford. So we don't know where she was living in Los Angeles. I've never been able to figure out. She's dead. Adrian West is dead. I talked to the kids, and I don't think they know anything in that much detail. But I have talked to the kids, um, and they gave me they told me the most that they could, seeing that they weren't even born yet. Uh, it's entirely possible that Virginia Short could have been in that house. Um, it's not beyond the realm of possibility, but we don't know. Um, so that's kind of that's the answer to that question. Um, okay, any other live questions here? If not, I can do another mailed in question. Anybody? Nope. Okay. Okay. Well, okay. Let me check my email. Okay. Um, oh, okay. Kagan, is it sure that the door hop at the Biltmore saw Miss Short leave? No. Okay. Um, the story is, and it comes from this book, The Badge, Jack Webb. Because Jack Webb wrote Dragnet, people assume that he was really connected to the LAPD. The story about, and I call it the noble doorman, it's in here, um, where Elizabeth Short he opens the door for Elizabeth Short and ushers her out. Now, that's all fiction. What happened was this. Red Manley leaves Elizabeth Short at the Biltmore. Okay. She's there. And she's missing for almost a week. It takes a few more days to identify her. It takes a few more days to find Red Manley because he's up in San Francisco. So finally, they find Red Manley. Finally, he tells them that he left her at the Biltmore. So about 2 weeks has gone by between the time he left her at the Biltmore and they figure out, okay, they go back to the Biltmore. And they interviewed a lot of Johnson. Thank you, Andre Johnson, Sullivan Johnson. Yeah, that's the guy. Um, so they interviewed the people at the reception desk um, about the about Elizabeth Short. And when Harry Hansen testified before the grand jury, he said, "Yeah, they he said, you know how it is. It's like, oh yes, I think I saw her. I'm pretty sure I saw her. They think maybe she went to. There's some payphones there in the lobby. They think maybe she went to the payphones. Maybe she made some phone calls. Um, but I think it's the kind of thing that people need to believe there was some sort of something to bring down the curtain on that scene. Otherwise, she just vanishes and nobody knows when she left, where she went. Um, People need to believe that. People need to believe that, oh, yeah, the doorman opened the door and ushered her out and she went south on Olive. Well, they don't know. And to me, that's the heck of it is Elizabeth Short was somebody who could disappear for almost a week and nobody would miss her. And that's tough. That's tough. It's hard to accept that, but that's kind of the reality. So that was they did. I think it was, if I remember correctly, the guy's name the guy's name is Studholme, Harold Studholme, something like that. Um, he thought they thought they saw her leave, but they weren't positive. They thought so. And no one, she never contacted anybody that knew her previous to that while she was missing. or during that week between the time she left the Biltmore and the time that her body was found. They did a lot of inquiry into whether she called Mark Hansen. Mark Hansen said no. He never heard from her again. He apparently contacted her. She apparently contacted Mark Hansen when she was in San Diego asking if she could come back. And he was like, no, I really don't want you to come back. Okay, let me go to one of the other, let's see here. Okay, let me go to one of the other email questions here. Stephen, what are Steve Hodel's and John Gilmore's very worst lies and fabrications? Let me do Gilmore, which is this book. Okay, this is another bad book, really bad book. But because it's one of the first ones out, it's very it's considered it's influential because it came out so early. Since John Gilmore died, much to the benefit of the rest of the world, the publisher has been reissuing the book they're fixing it. They're not calling it fixing it. I think they found some nice term for cleaning up John Gilmore's mess. He did a lot of damage. He was the one. He originated the story that she was forced to eat feces. That's a John Gilmore thing. There are a lot of other ones. I try not to think about Severed, but that's one of them. But he just made up all kinds of people. And then, of course, the Jack Anderson Wilson thing. I'm not sure anybody really believes that anymore. When you go through the John Gilmore archives at UCLA, if you choose to do that, and read what's there, you'll see that he was giving money to this guy Jack Anderson Wilson to say how he killed Elizabeth Short. I mean, it's like, oh, come on. And as far as Steve Hodel, it's like, making his dad into this criminal genius. None of it's true. It is this parallel universe. Pretty much nothing Steve Hodel says is true, and that's enough of that. Let's see. How well did Mary Passios know Elizabeth? How much interaction did the two have? In her book, why did she think Orson Welles didn't have anything to do with the murder of Elizabeth? Okay. Let me preface this by saying I like Mary Passios. I met her a long time ago. I'm not in regular contact with her. I've had lunch with her or breakfast a couple of times, that kind of thing. And she's pleasant company and all that. I consider her a friend. And yet some of the things she says are impossible. It just, no. It is just, she will say that she was babysitting and she found out about that Elizabeth Short had been killed when she was watching a movie on TV and a newscast interrupted, or they were watching the news. Okay, no, that's not possible. You didn't have TV news in 1947. That didn't exist. I was having lunch with her, a very nice lunch, and she started telling me about the Orson Welles stuff, and it's like, it's just no. It's just. It is just the thing she says, as nice as she is, and as much as I like her as a person, what she says is impossible. I know what the Short family thinks. At least certain members of Elizabeth Short's family. Again, this is from Elizabeth Short's family. As far as they are concerned, Mary Passios has made a career out of knowing the Black Dahlia. They're not fans. But again, that's what I was told. It's her knowledge of Elizabeth Short was probably a lot less than what she says. Again, some of the things, based on some of the things Mary says that can be checked, the rest of it is not terribly reliable. What was reliable is her older brother. She put me in touch with her older brother, Bob. who was a great source. He told me a lot about Medford, Massachusetts in the 40s, growing up, about the Short family. He was a very good source. He was a lot more helpful than Mary was. And so I put a lot of stock in what he said. And I'll leave it at that. Okay. Um, let's see another emailed question here. Okay. What's the story with Gordon Fickling? According to the Los Angeles Times, Fickling was wary of the girl's feeling for him and uncertain that a romance might be any more permanent than her interest in her more than 20 other former boyfriends. So he knew Miss Short was inordinately fond of male company. Yet he apparently invited her to join him in Long Beach, and they lived together in hotels in July and August of 46. It seems to me that most men wouldn't do that unless they were romantically interested in the woman or at least getting something in return. Also, according to the same LA Times article, he sent her a $100 money order when she was staying with the French family. That was a tidy sum in 1946. He must have been a true blue Samaritan, or maybe men were more chivalrous in the 1940s. Okay. I interviewed Gordon Fickling. Very nice guy. He's a Southerner. He's very gentlemanly. Okay. Let me preface this by saying that when I interviewed him, he let me know that he was at that point in his 80s. So, you know, um, and there was a real strong discrepancy between the letters that we have and what was in the newspapers and what he told me. But that's very typical. Someone who actually knew Elizabeth Short, even now, many, many years later, they really, really, really minimize their connection to her. I barely knew her, um, or they won't talk about it at all. That's pretty typical. The people who shoot off their mouths and say, oh, yeah, my dad knew them. Nah, the people who really knew her, absolutely, it's very typical. They never talk about it. Their kids will say, yeah, my dad knew Elizabeth Short. He only mentioned her one time in my entire life, and it was like, yeah, I knew her, and that's it. That's much more typical. With Fickling, I think it was a combination of things. I mean, um, I have to try to balance these two things that really can't be balanced in terms of what he told me in 1996 and what's in the newspapers. Um, he did invite her out to Long Beach. Um, but he was adamant that he never stayed in the he never went up to her room when she was staying in Long Beach. Um, Never saw her tattoo, was never intimate with her. I mean, he volunteered all that stuff. I would have never asked him, oh, were you ever intimate? No, he volunteered that. Um, so it is one of the things Fickling says is she got a lot of passes, but she knew how to handle them. Um, he would say that it was very amusing to watch the competition for her attention among the guys competing for her attention, that kind of thing. Um, he did send her money regularly, that's for sure. Um, I think he tended to be more of a good Samaritan. She tended to find those kind of guys. Elizabeth Short was pretty selective in weeding out guys who weren't going to push her for sex. She was pretty good at that. Um, and so I think that was, Fickling was a Southern gentleman. He wasn't going to push her. And I think that is actually pretty typical. I think she kind of selected for that, is my hunch. Okay, let's see. Uh, Andre, on Mary Passios's website, I read that Finest Brown was taken off the case and replaced by Jack McReady. Is this true? I don't know. Maybe Finest Brown. I mean, Harry Hansen uh, was on the Black Dahlia case from the day he went to the crime scene to the day he retired. Finest Brown was involved on the case for he worked the case for a couple of years, and I'm not sure what his trajectory was within the LAPD. Generally speaking, guys who worked homicide, they stayed in homicide for the remainder of their career. So I don't know. But Hansen stayed with the Black Dahlia case from 1947 until he retired in the 60s. And so, you know, since and Hansen would be the main guy. He would have a partner to do that. But I'm pretty sure Finest Brown was on the Black Dahlia case into the 1950s because as late as something like 1955, he went back to the East Coast and did some interviews. So he was at least on the case that long. As far as being taken off the case, I don't know. Okay, so that's kind of that. Let's see. Okay, while Andre is doing that, let me go to one of these other email questions here. Okay. Where am I? Okay, from Chris. Have you found out where Dr. Bailey was living upon leaving his wife? Okay. Dr. Walter Bailey used his office address for everything. I have checked and checked and checked. I don't know. As I said, he used his office address for everything. It was the professional building on West 6th Street. So wherever oh, Andre, that's totally wrong. You know, again, I wouldn't put any weight I wouldn't give any weight at all to anything Mary Passio says. Again, I like Mary Passios as a person. I don't want to trash her, but given what she says that I can check, she's very unreliable. So no, Finest Brown was definitely on the Black Dahlia case way after January 23rd, 47. No, that's totally wrong. Okay. So anyway, and that's the answer where Walter Bailey was living. He used his office address for absolutely everything. So that's the most that we know there. D. Kagan, you can speak ill of the dead. I do it. Cleo's Short's abandonment had an adverse effect on Miss Short's emotional and psychological development. Oh yeah, definitely. You know, it was that whole family constellation. Not to get overly psychoanalytical, but you've got the dad and Phoebe and these 5 girls, and then the dad just takes off. And you know, Phoebe's left. It's the depression. She hasn't worked in a long time. You know, she's been out of the job market having kids and whatnot. So she goes back to work, or she doesn't. Sometimes she's working, sometimes she's not. It was a pretty tough life once Cleo left. The connection where Elizabeth Short and Cleo reconnected very briefly. Cleo Cleo roamed around a lot. Cleo went all over the country, and in I think it was 43, about 40 during World War II, we'll say. Cleo was working at Mare Island Shipyard in Vallejo, and he had Elizabeth come out and stay with him, and he was staying with another guy and his wife. This other guy was a co-worker at Mare Island Navy Yard, and the wife had a baby, and so the house where they were staying, and remember there was a housing shortage. It was too crowded because you've got Cleo and Elizabeth, you've got this other couple and the baby, and they have the mother-in-law coming up to help with the baby. So what happens is the mother-in-law gives Cleo and Elizabeth the keys to her house, which was near the USC campus. Okay. Now it's part of USC campus. At that time, it was a private residence. And Cleo and Elizabeth are in LA at this house very briefly, a week or two. And then Elizabeth just takes off and goes up to Camp Cook. Doesn't say goodbye to her dad, and that's it. And I think there was a complete rupture at that point where when she came back to Los Angeles in 46, she didn't contact him. He didn't know she was in town until she got killed. That was the first he knew of it. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it was, Cleo's actions are hard to understand for sure. He is as much a mystery in some ways as Elizabeth Short is, and I'll leave it at that. Okay, Andre, as I said, given what I know about what Mary Passio says, I just, anything from her is just no. And if she says that, it's wrong. Finest Brown, Finest Brown most likely wrote the LAPD summary on the Black Dahlia case, and because it's not signed, but based on internal evidence, it was written. I think it was written about 1950, and the unsigned author doesn't identify himself, but it's most likely Finest Brown. So no, he definitely was. Now that's no. So anyway, no. Anything with Mary, as I said, I don't want to say a lot because I like Mary, but some of the stuff she says is just not to be believed. Okay, let's take another email question here. Okay, this is from Stephen. Did you watch Mindhunter on Netflix? Do you like books and shows about criminal profiling and detective work? No, I don't. I don't watch Mindhunter. I interviewed John Douglas. That's enough for me. And I think that one of the problems with profiling is that too many investigators were doing off the shelf profiles and calling themselves profilers, and they really weren't very good at it. They were doing a lot of the boilerplate, quiet loner, white male with a well-maintained older car. And what really knocked that for a loop was the DC Sniper. It was two African American guys who were doing these shootings, and they were looking for a white guy. It's like no. So I watched a bunch of Forensic Files and Investigation Discovery, and the narrator in that has a particular way of saying blood. They found human blood, but the reality is they cherry pick those shows. They cherry pick. They only do shows where they catch the guy. The police are always, they're relentless. They never give up. And the killer is invariably the ex-husband or the estranged boyfriend. It's usually, the victim is usually a woman, and the killer is, the ex-husband or an estranged boyfriend, or every once in a while, it's a stranger danger at the bar, that kind of thing. So yeah, Joan, exactly right. Wayne Williams was another one. Yeah, exactly right. So that's kind of that. And it's like, I am not a true crime guy. And I have gotten to the point where I really dislike the true crime genre because it's really gotten sleazy, which is one reason I don't do the shows anymore. It's just when you look at the podcast or when you listen to the podcast, you might be amazed to find out that there are more than way more than 200 true crime podcasts. The ranking of podcasts, of true crime podcasts, only goes to 200, which means there are more that aren't even ranked. I mean, that's a lot. And so it's like, no, I'm just happier if I don't listen to that stuff. Okay, so that's that. V, what was John St. John's role in the investigation? Anything of value? John St. John was one of the caretakers of the Black Dahlia case after Harry Hansen retired. It went through a series of sort of veteran homicide detectives. Danny Galindo was kind of the caretaker, John St. John. I think John St. John was the one who talked to John Gilmore and was very sort of non-committal. John St. John, the only interview that I can think of off the top of my head with John St. John about the Black Dahlia case, or at all, there's a video called Shotgun Freeway, and it's a documentary here in Los Angeles, and it was made by a couple of friends of mine, and they interviewed John St. John, and he talks about the Black Dahlia case very briefly. All he says is she was cut up in a real bad way, and that's that. So that's kind of it about John St. John. Again, these guys were mainly caretakers. They answered the phone if somebody called up and said, my dad killed the Black Dahlia. That never happens, right? But it was a whole cruise. There was John St. John, as I said, Danny Galindo. I think the guy's name was Paul Teeter. And then he passed it off to Brian Carr. And Brian Carr was the guy who was the caretaker of the Black Dahlia case when I was doing my research on it in the 90s. And Brian is retired. He has passed it on to Mitzi Roberts, is the current, as far as I know, the current custodian of the Black Dahlia case. And Brian wasn't even born when Elizabeth Short was killed. I mean, that's kind of how it is. But one of the things Brian Carr will say just flat out, if Steve Hodel had come to me and asked to see his dad's file before he wrote this little number, I would let him see it. He didn't ask. He never asked to see his dad's file. So that was, and you mentioned, Steve Hodel to Brian, and he just laughs. So that's kind of John St. John. Let's do another email question here. Let's see here. What have we got? Okay. This is from, let's see, who is this from? I can't remember who this is from now. I think this was from Malcolm, maybe. Do you think the LAPD will ever allow serious researchers access to the Black Dahlia files? The LAPD seems to be treating the files like the crown jewels. They don't intend to do anything with them, but they don't want others putting their dirty mitts on them either. I realize the case is still officially open and that the LAPD doesn't want any crazies rifling through the files, pocketing more shots to be sold later on eBay, but there has to be a middle way. No, there doesn't. No. There is no middle way when you deal with the LAPD. No, there is not. No one gets in to see the Black Dahlia files. You will have people, I think this was John Gilmore, but say that, oh, that's all fake. There's really nothing in the file cabinet. I have seen the file cabinet. It's a black file cabinet in robbery homicide, and it is cram-packed with stuff. And they saved everything. As I said, in the 1950s, Finest Brown went back east to do some interviews, and they still have his airplane tickets. Beyond that, nobody really gets into it. Joan is here. John, am I safe to say that nobody's getting? I mean, you had access to the files to do the exhibit, but isn't that generally so, that nobody's getting into there anytime soon? Joan? Hello? Maybe she's typing. There would. Oh, okay, there we go. Yeah, nobody gets in. Yeah, um, and it is it's for the best. I mean, it really is. Nobody. It protects that material. That nobody. It is under lock and key. Um, I when I was there, the secretary at Romney Homicide had the key. Brian Carr didn't even have the key to the file cabinet. He had to ask for it. And there's a reason for that stuff. Black Dahlia things wander off. They absolutely do. Um, it's good example is the all the Black Dahlia photographs that were at LA Public Library. They're all scanned. Pardon me. They're all scanned. They are online, but the actual prints are missing. And I found that out if you read Suzanne Orlean's book on the on the library. She just mentions that in passing. Oh yeah, they're all gone. Uh, Black Dahlia stuff walks off. It definitely does. And so I think the LAPD is, and I've asked to see it. I got a very nice note from the LAPD on why they're why they're not going to let me see it. But it's just not happening. So no, there is no middle way when you're dealing with the LAPD. No. Um, let's see. Um, right, right. Joan, that exhibit was James. I think it was James Elroy presents Elizabeth, something like that. If you poke around on the internet, um, if you poke around on the internet, you will see pictures of that exhibit that was at the Police Historical Society. Um, it's it's mostly stuff that was out there already. For example, it was published in the paper, or stuff that isn't really going to be all that helpful. There was, if I remember correctly, there were pages of here's all the addresses where we door knocked, and it was like every every uh, address they'd gone to, but it showed the extent of the investigation. They had gone all. I think it was on the other side of Crenshaw, as a matter of fact, blocks away that they had gone to. There was the Woody Guthrie stuff, which is sort of, it's amusing, but Woody Guthrie didn't kill Elizabeth Short. That kind of thing, or the actual copy of something that had been reprinted in the paper. Um, yeah, uh, Andre, yes, I am familiar with Robert Robinson. You know, he did do that. Those photographs that were in the police exhibit are now all over the internet. Yeah. The story was that Robertson and a buddy from Boise were returning servicemen. They decided, hey, let's go to LA and for a couple of days. So they came to LA. They were staying at the hotel in Long Beach where Elizabeth Short was staying. So they met her, and they had breakfast with her at the little drugstore lunch counter where she got the Black Dahlia nickname. And one time, she wanted to go dancing at the I think it was the Palladium. I think it was the Palladium. And so they took her up to LA and Hollywood, and they went to the Palladium, and they took those photographs of her that you see. There's one where she's in front of Grauman's, and there's one where she's in front of one of the radio studios on, I think it's on Sunset and whatnot. Yeah, and that was it. And then Robertson and his buddy went back to Idaho, and I think corresponded with him for a while, and then they didn't hear anything more until all of a sudden it was in the paper that she was killed. So yeah, um, so that's kind of that. Oh right, right, in front of Earl Carroll's. That's exactly right. Yeah, and so and what's really amusing is some of those photographs people have picked up that I took. And the reason I know that is because you can see my reflection. The photographs were in a glass case, and you can see like my face reflected in the glass of the case. Um, Yeah, Andre, I'm not sure about that. I'm, I mean, they knew he was in Idaho. He was a non-starter. I don't remember. I think he'd been a prize fighter. I think the story that I recall about Robertson was that uh, he was like some boxing champ in the Army or the Marines or something like that. But I don't remember anything beyond that. But you know, he's really a non-starter. Um, anyway, okay, let me go down to let me get one of my email questions here. Let's see. Where are we? Okay, this is from Chris. Did Virginia ever mention knowing the Bailey family who lived one block from where her sister was found? Um, we don't know. Um, it sounds like kind of maybe not, in the sense that um, there was an absolute sensation. Virginia Short and Adrian West and Phoebe all came back to LA to identify the body. Yes, that's right. Um, and identifying the body was a problem. Cleo would not do it, which says a lot about Cleo. Anyway, so they had gone through quite a bit with Phoebe and Adrian and Virginia. They had gone a lot. They came down and they went to the coroner, but there were so many newspaper reporters and photographers around that they left without identifying the body. And so the coroner's office then arranged a secret session where they could identify. And I'm not sure whether they actually showed them the body. I mean, typically the coroner would sometimes, if the victim was in particularly bad shape, they would show like a photograph. I don't know what they did in this particular instance, but whether they did the whole thing you see in the movies where they pull the sheet back, I don't know if they really did that. But the identification was made. But Virginia Short had gone through that uh, at the same time that she talked to the cops, and so she may not have been thinking about people she knew in LA at that point. We just don't know. And again, Adrian and Virginia died a long time ago. There's really no talking to them now. Um, I do have a photograph of Adrian and Virginia visiting Barbara Lindgren later on. So they maintained a connection and that was very typical. Um, as I said, Adrian was a very devout Presbyterian. He kept in touch with people that he knew, and it would be very typical for him to stay in touch with people that he knew from church. That's par for the course for Adrian. So it's entirely likely that they stayed in touch. But whether Virginia told the cops that, I don't know. Um, Joan, the what about the DA's files? Okay, this is boxy. Um, this is the bulk of what was in the district attorney's files, um, and they're a mess. Uh, if you listen to Steve Hodel, he will tell you, "Oh yeah, Frank Jimison turned over everything to the LAPD, and he kept this separate second books, magically for Steve Hodel to find." Nah, none of that's true. What really happened was the DA was doing a records purge, and somebody decided, hey, these look important. Maybe we shouldn't throw them out. And so they shoveled these files into boxes, and they are a mess. And so Steve Hodel, Steve Lopez got access to the DA's files, and then Steve Hodel looked at them and found the stuff on his dad, and then that was that. At that point, the access to the district attorney's files was handled by the Public Information Office, and I worked with Sandy Gibbons, who at that time who has since left the DA's office, but that's who I dealt with. And you had to be a published author or a reporter or something like that. It wasn't just for Joe Schmo. You couldn't wander in there and say, "Hey, show me the Black Dahlia files." And so I went in there and I copied almost everything. I would say I have about 98% of what was in the in the I say I have about 98% of the district attorney's material. Subsequently to that, the DA no longer lets people look at the actual files. What they've done is they've scanned things and they have redacted this weird flash. They have redacted identifying addresses um, and that and identifying information, which is pretty ridiculous when some of these people are over 100 years old. But anyway, but it isn't complete. And my understanding is they scanned it, and the procedure is you send a blank CD if you can find one in this day and age to the DA's office, and they burn it for you and send it back. It's what you get from the DA under a Freedom of Information Act now is not everything. You don't get any of the handwritten memos. There's a lot of material that isn't included, and probably rightly so. I mean, remember, this was a records purge. And I can tell you from going through the original boxes that they were a mess. They were tainted with stuff from other cases. Um, was mixed in with the Black Dahlia stuff. And it's like, what is this doing in here? And by the same token, there was Black Dahlia stuff in other boxes. It was a very sloppy thing where they just shoveled files into boxes. And so that's kind of that. So, Joan, I don't know if that's what you were asking about the DA's files, but that's kind of my rant on the DA's files. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's absolutely true. Um, and I was, Joan, I have to say, thankfully, I was able to work with the city archives, which were, and I haven't been down there in a long time, but they were really very well handled, very secure, um, and that kind of thing. There is a lot of material in the city archives. But I mean, a huge a huge institution like the city of Los Angeles or Los Angeles County, it is maybe with email or maybe with electronic documents and PDFs, it's easier to save stuff. But I mean, you could be just drowning in paperwork. And it's always amazing when you go into the city archives, which are at Piper Tech, and you ask to see council file this, that, or the other thing, and somebody trundles in with one of these boxes, and you just start digging. It's amazing, So let's see, Andre. Yeah, as I said, Robertson is a non-starter in my opinion. I mean, we know where he was when she was killed. It doesn't matter. He could have been scared. He could have not. He could have been a butcher. He could have been a skydiver. It doesn't matter. He wasn't there. He didn't do it. It is really, I mean, you have to be so clinical and just say, okay, there's no connection to Elizabeth Short. Out you go, because otherwise you'll just get bogged down in all the sideshow, all these people who are just so peripheral. It's like, nope, you just can't, you can't tie yourself down with that. I think I'm coming up on an hour and 10 minutes, so let me do one more email question here and one live question. And let's see. Does the Black Dahlia murder look like a sex crime to you, or that someone went to a lot of trouble to stage it that way? Okay. This is what I am told. Okay. I am told that the murder of Elizabeth Short was a lust murder. This is from John Douglas. Okay. And a lust murder doesn't have anything to do with lust. You can find a lot more reliable information. Ann Redding did a great presentation on Lust Murder and the Black Dahlia case. I'm not sure if it's online. If you can find it, it would be great. I think she did it at CrimeCon a couple of years ago when it was in New Orleans. And so she would be much better person to speak to that than I would be. It is because of what was done to her. It was so much. There was certainly a sexual nature to it. But again, I'm not an expert in lust murder, and I would recommend, talk to an authority on that kind of thing, because that's really out of my that's really not what I'm willing to talk about at this point. Okay. And I guess as I said, I think we're coming up on an hour and 10 minutes. Anybody have any last questions before we sign off? No? Okay. Well, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks, folks. And thanks everybody for showing up. And I will do one the first Tuesday of May. And let me get out my calendar here so that I don't have to reschedule it a couple of times. Okay. Okay. Calendar for May. It will be May 2nd. Okay. May 2nd. That is the first Tuesday of May. Amused Child. I just have one thing to say about Wikipedia. I only read it for amusement, although someone recently, some prankster, went in to the George Hodel entry and said that he lived with me. And so I went in and fixed that. But I monitor the Black Dahlia stuff pretty regularly. Not all of it, but some of it. But I've given up. I really have a hands-off approach, except, if it says George Hodel lived with me, then I'll intervene. I'll do an intervention. And then let's see. Oh, in the Black Dahlia suspects, there was one guy who was listed as he was listed for one day as a prank, that he went back to 1947 in a time machine. And for some reason, people keep restoring this guy's name. I think his name was Fisk. Anyway, so that I will remove, just because people keep mistakenly reverting it. Okay. Amused Child, good for you. I've given up on Wikipedia except for that and IMDb. Steve Hodel is a 24. He is tireless. When you go into newspapers.com, he's all over that with newspaper clippings. He's all over ancestry.com about his dad. I mean, the guy is just he is really 24/7 about his dad, who did every unsolved murder on the planet. Okay, so first Tuesday in May, 10 o'clock, and I will by then try to figure out why it is so hard to launch the dang the live stream. I'll figure it out. Okay, all right, 10 o'clock Tuesday, May 2nd. See you then. Thanks for showing up. Say goodbye, Boxy.